In her place, Eamonn Brennan, the Director General of Eurocontrol, has very kindly agreed to come up and sit in the hot seat. I have a long list of questions about the internal functioning of the European Commission that I will now ask you. No, we're going to talk about a subject that has not been covered today, AT. Just as background, I'm the Brussels bureau chief of the Wall Street Journal. So mostly I cover the European Union and NATO, but for 15 years I was the journal's aviation reporter here. And I started in 1999, and that 20 years ago, one of the hot issues was ATC and congestion and all those issues. So considering how much has changed in the past 20 years, from your perspective at Eurocontrol, how bad is the situation?
Well, there's a consistent record in Europe of air traffic control being rescued by a good crisis. You know, way back, Madame Palacio started a single European sky, and then we were in bad shape, a lot of delays, and then a miracle happened, 9/11. Capacity then cut back, no big problem again. We sail on again, building up capacity, up again to 2008. Then Wall Street collapses, and then the financial crisis, and then the airlines stop flying, saved by the bell again. And now we're on our third cycle, and unless something big happens, this time we're heading for the wall.
Yeah, unfortunately things aren't looking that way. The economies are generally growing, air traffic's growing. You at Eurocontrol are trying to do what you can. Can you talk through the specific steps that you're taking?
Yeah, so we work very collaboratively and very closely with everybody in Europe. But what we're doing for this summer specifically, just to answer the question directly, is we're moving flights around Europe. We're changing airways, we're moving routes, particularly we're moving flights away from the congested airspace. Germany, where there's an air traffic control staffing shortage, we're moving away from that. We're moving them away from the Marseille area, where you have this strikes problem and also low capacity. So we're actually intervening very proactively and moving flows, very similar to what the command center do in the United States. We don't always have the power to do this, but this summer we've got much more proactive, and we're actually taking routes out of the system, and we're trying to make sure that any aircraft that's in airspace is only the aircraft that should be there. You know, so if you don't need to transit busy German airspace, then you should not be there until they can restore the capacity. So we're trying to do something to help.
And how much difference does that make?
Well, it makes a huge difference. I mean, maybe I'll just give you an idea. We're going to take about 1,000 flights a day, move it from this area, and that is huge. So we're trying to save 19 million minutes of delay. Now, if you wanted to really see what would happen, if the network manager, if you wanted to bring this crisis to a head, if we didn't intervene at all this summer, then you would see, 2 and 3 hour delays and slot delays, from some of the main areas. And that's the reality. So our intervention actually smooths the system along, and that's our role. But our problem is that we have some black spots with capacity, and there's no denying it. It needs to be dealt with.
Okay. Does capacity need to be limited? Is that, I don't know if that's forbidden subject here, but or some people like the idea.
The guy who came up on the stage, I wasn't sure what he was doing, but I assumed it had something to do with the environment and capacity. but we did, like our busiest day this year, we had 37,000 flights, and this is the busiest day we ever had. So, and we are looking at consistent high days of traffic, and we're looking at going to about 55,000 flights by 2030. Now the issue is we can never get to 2030 and do 55,000 flights, not with the current system we have. It simply won't happen. So the question is there a capacity cap, or do we make the system more modern? I favour making the system more modern, accommodating the demand, but on the current system, the way we're organised, fragmented, simply won't happen.
Okay. You this morning met, I gather, with the airline CEOs, and I don't see any signs of bodily harm. I gather you have a pretty good relationship with the CEOs. They even say fairly nice things about you. How does that relationship help or change the dynamic?
Well, I think I pick up on the point that Jeff was saying earlier. It's about collaboration. You don't win if everybody's headbutting each other, but the most important thing in Europe at the moment is that where there's a problem, we accept there's a problem and we do something about it. That's what's important. So to me, what I was saying to the CEOs this morning is that, look, these are the measures for the summer. We can help you this summer, we will do this. But in the long run, you have to lobby the governments, you have to lobby the Commission, you have to lobby for changes to the two big issues that we face, and they are fragmentation and monopoly service provision. And these are the two issues that we face. Now, we've known this for 20 years, so what I'm saying here today, if I came here, it'd be no problem. Maybe if I can just tell you a story. About 10 years ago, I went to this conference in I think it was in Amsterdam, and I made a presentation about how the single European sky had evolved. And when I finished the presentation, everybody gave a big clap. And I said, okay, guys, one thing I just want to say to you, that's the same presentation I made 10 years ago. And the same thing applies today. Very little actually changes because there's no incentive. So we need to introduce financial incentives for people to perform because there's good performers, and financial penalties for those who don't perform. And it needs to be carrot and stick. All carrot won't work, stick won't work. But at the moment, we just got to wait for the new Commission and the good government. But the Commission do a lot of good work. The problem is the Member States don't back them up.
Yeah, and we heard some pretty strong words this morning. Willie Walsh was describing one sector that shall remain nameless but has been named many times as disgraceful. When those, and you're talking to them, do they show signs of shame? Do they feel disgraced, or do they have a completely different view on it, like those damn airlines?
So first of all, the first piece is no, okay? And the second thing is that when they come to my office, we try to see, can we sort the problem out? I mean, I'm always trying to be solution focused, but I've now finally grown up to the fact that there's two parts to the solution. There's, this morning when you go and you talk to Carsten and all these guys, they want to know, what are you going to do for next summer? And this is where A4E have got to grow up a little bit also, and they've got to realise we've got to come together for a long-term structural change. And what I'm looking for is much more central, what I would say, control by the network manager on routes, in the same fashion as you have from the command centre in the United States. And I said to the CEOs this morning, and it was showed what the command centre said to me is that, look, we've got a 51% rule. And I said, tell me about that. And they said, it's like bringing your dog for a walk. And you have a stick. You never need to beat him, but the fact that you've got the stick, they all perform perfectly. And this is what's missing in Europe, is that individually they can all do their own things very well, and they do. But the problem is we've got a network, and we cannot get together on the network. And then you see sometimes this idea floated that new technology miraculously will show up and solve everything. It won't. It's about fragmentation, and I think Willie Walsh was saying earlier, if you flew from Madrid to Oslo in 1959, you can use the same routes as you can use today. Nothing has changed. So, by and large, I would even venture to say, and I'm not sure about this, but I'll throw it out there, if you had the same map, I think France is by and large in the same position.
We've got countries, and it's an international treaty organization. It's not part of the EU. What authority and power do you have to do the things you want to do? Are there limits? Do you need changes to have a bigger impact?
Well, first of all, we work very closely with the EU. I mean, that's the majority of our member states are EU. But we also have a wider pan-European dimension. We have states like the Ukraine, like Turkey, and also the United Kingdom when they leave, or if they leave, or who knows, will be there. Okay. But so what we have is basically we're the operational arm. We network the system together. Like, the system costs 10 billion a year to run, 2 billion in terminal, 8 billion en route. We collect that, we dish it out, we do all the research. So for us, I believe that we've got to work closer with the Commission, but actually try to be the implementing arm, because there's enough people making policy, talking about policy, what needs to happen. What needs to happen in the next few years is something. But here's the problem, not very much happens. We've produced tons of paper, mountains of regulation, forests of kind of working papers, but nothing happens. The last significant change that occurred in European airspace was in 2003, when reduced vertical separation was introduced. Since then, actually there's been no big efficiency gain. So all this technology and all this money, you have to query what's happening, and I believe it just needs to be targeted better.
A4E has this proposal on the upper level overflight, for example, in the event of a strike. How realistic is that?
No, I mean, it's probably not, first of all, it is realistic. I mean, I understand their frustration. I understand that. There's a number of ways of solving this problem. And there's an airspace study out there looking at what I would call dynamic sectorization, cross-border stuff. And there was discussion this morning about the military. The military, I deal with the military every day. They are not a problem when it comes to Europe. We facilitate large-scale European exercises every day. We facilitate training. If the civil side was a quarter as efficient as the military, we would be much better. Because the military say the airspace will be back at 4 o'clock. It's back at 4 o'clock. And this is what we find with them. So that's a kind of a red herring, really. The issue really is basically fragmentation, monopoly service provision, and making sure that we have a proper system of incentives on the one hand and a stick, like for the dog, on the other hand.
Mm-hmm. And does Eurocontrol have a way to influence that other than sort of the bully pulpit and you're explaining from your perspective what needs to be done, or is there something more direct?
We do. I mean, we work really hard. I mean, let's say, who is Eurocontrol? It's an organisation of 41 states. The Director Generals of Civil Aviation are effectively my board. They come, we explain this to them, we talk to them. But you have this kind of mix in Europe where, the air navigation service providers on one hand are a business and a company, and that's on Monday. On Tuesday, they're the state. And on Wednesday, they could actually be the regulator. And on Thursday, they're the NSP again. So we need to get these roles clarified. And this is the problem that our setup in Europe has. But I would say, in fairness to the States, they are now realising that there are issues. And the Commission have formed a wise persons group that I sit on. And the plan is to come up with a series of good actions that will form the basis of Single European Sky 3 package. And this is what I need A4E to support. When they see this package, don't nitpick it. Say, let's go for it this time. Because if you took the previous wise persons group that Jeff there is looking at ago, and if you took that and presented it here today, I'd be happy with that if we implemented that. Because nothing's changed, except the weather.
Did you make this proposal to the A4E CEOs this morning?
Yeah, no, I did. I outlined to them what needs to be done, and they were supportive. I mean, they get it as well. They get it for long-term fleet planning. They understand it. But I do understand the short-term frustration. I can't solve the capacity problem in Germany this summer with a shortage of staff, so all we can do is fly around it. And the downside of that, what the CEO of Lufthansa said, is that we're now generating more CO2 emissions. We're level capping aircraft, we're saying them longer, and this is going to get us in trouble. As collectively in this room, everybody in this room likes aviation, maybe except for the guy who turned up there, but we all like aviation. But if we start generating more CO2 than the growth rate of the industry, then we're putting ourselves on a big red circle. So collectively, we have to deal with this problem, and we've got to grow up. And I think Jeff Poole made a good point. He said, look, the states have got to realise that sovereignty of their airspace, yeah, it's fine. We're not taking sovereignty of your airspace. I mean, if there's pilots here, I don't know if when you fly from France into Germany, do you notice a little bump? So this is the reality. Yeah. So it's all single airspace. So we need a single European airspace that's managed by different providers. Now, not maybe on a border basis.
And we've heard that there are a few sectors that are a huge part of the problem. Let's say those sectors worked as well as the average.
Yeah.
How efficient would European airspace be?
We can make huge capacity gains by doing some simple things. First of all, if you empower the network manager to direct traffic as distinct from facilitate traffic, I believe you can get a 20 to 25% increase in capacity. That's number one. Number two, if every sector performed to what the best sector performs, okay, so the best sectors are putting through 80 to 90 an hour, the worst sectors are putting through 30 to 40 an hour. So there's an improvement there. And the third thing is we have this crazy system where air traffic controllers take a long time to be trained. I mean, it is, so we need to facilitate this better. And, I don't agree with Michael O'Leary to say it can be done in 6 months. That's not possible. But what is possible is to be faster, definitely, and maybe to look at training air traffic controllers like pilots, where they're trained on a system as distinct than on a geographical area. And that's what the Cesar Solutions idea, so that you get trained on a system and then you can, by and large, move system to system. So you're not kind of hooked into the Black Forest area of Germany or Northern Ireland or Portugal. You can actually move systems. Same as an A320 pilot can move. He can go to BA in the morning, he can go to Lufthansa, and he very quickly will get line training. So manpower is important. And then the last thing I think we need to look at is technological development, particularly AI and algorithm-based air traffic systems. And this is for the future, so we can't forget that either. But there's some simple things we can do.
And the first one you mentioned there, for the network manager to direct, does that require Single European Skies 3?
It requires two things to happen. First of all, it requires the Commission to give more power to Eurocontrol to do it, and there's always this issue, they're worried about this, and they worry, and then the Member States worry. But the reality is, if we don't do that, we can't manage the system. Now, this summer, we've exceeded our powers. I'll be honest with you. I went to the Council of Ministers in December. I put this plan up there and I said, guys, are you happy with this? And the Austrian minister went around the table and said, yes, 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 yes. Then I said, do it. Because there's no other way to do it. If we don't do it, we will be looking at huge delays this summer. So even what we're looking for this summer, just to finish up, Mark, is that all we're going to do is do the same as we did last summer. And that's not to me, I'm embarrassed about that. Like, with all the measures we're taking, we get to the same result which was last summer, which was a crock.
I think there's some people in this room who would like to have you declare dictator for life.
No, I don't want to be
dictator.
Your
power as,
no, I don't want to be a dictator. but just sometimes somebody's got to do something. You know, it's all okay to have a kind of what we call in Ireland waffle, you know, and everybody talking about it. But eventually you've got to settle on a plan and kick a little bit of ass to get it done. And that's all we can do in Eurocontrol. And I think we've got the platform in Eurocontrol to be collaborative. I'm working closely with A4E, I'm working closely with CANSO. I'm trying to get everybody into the same rule to jointly share the problem. You know, beating each other up doesn't sort it.
Excellent. Well, in the spirit of our conversation, the countdown clock is under 3 seconds, so I think we will end it here.
Thank you very
Brennan,
much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. That's very good. All right, Thomas. Excellent. Thank you very much. Yeah, no problem.
Anonymous or otherwise, this is the point of the part of the day where you can ask anything. Nothing's off limits. I've instructed A4E that unless your question is vulgar, politically racist, or otherwise offensive, it goes up there. Mere uncomfortableness for a member of the panel is not a criteria for censorship. And with that in mind, let's bring the panel up. Johan Lundgren, first of all from easyJet, you're going to be next to me. Willie Walsh, where are you, Willie? Where's he gone? You're there. Carsten, do you take that seat? Pieter, you're in this seat. And Michael, you're here. Let me push you a little closer. Not that you ever have any difficulty in the light, but to make sure you're fully in the light. No, you're there. Michael's in the dark.
As usual.
Well, I felt certain that you'd make your voice heard more than most. We've had a very busy day. We've talked a lot about... we've talked an enormous amount about air traffic delays. We've talked about environmental issues. But I think we haven't really discussed one issue of importance. Pieter, how does it feel to be running a state-owned airline? Let's talk about government intervention into the industry. Well, I'm getting to Willie in a minute. You were telling me earlier, it came as a shock to everybody, but does it have any practical implications for the airline that the Dutch government now has a 14% stake?
Well, the Dutch government made a very clear statement last week, and by doing so, they made a very strong commitment towards the Group Air France KLM, and to make sure that we can continue to move forward as a group. The practical translations still have to remain to be seen.
Recognizing your unique position on this panel in this, I shall leave it there but turn to the others.
Yeah, please do so.
Willie Walsh, he's not the only one with considerable state interests. Qatar Airways, which of course is sovereign owned, is one of your major shareholders.
Yeah, and a good shareholder. They're very supportive of the management and the board, but they don't interfere in any way. They've no say in the day-to-day operational decisions or indeed in the strategic decisions. They are like what you would expect from a financial shareholder who's made a fantastic return on the investment they made in IAG, and they're very pleased with the dividends that we pay.
But as a matter of philosophy or corporate philosophy, do you encourage the idea of state involvement?
No, I don't. I ran Aer Lingus when it was effectively 100%. It was 97%, I think, owned by the Irish government. So when I took over in 2001, I ignored everything they said to me. I didn't entertain any suggestions that were given. I told them I wouldn't do what they wanted me to do, and said if they had a problem with that, they should find somebody else. Because what we needed to do in Aer Lingus at the time was not compatible with what governments want to do, which is to consider the implications of management's decisions on their re-electability. And normally, when faced with difficult challenges like that, it puts politicians in a difficult position. So I'm not being critical of what the Dutch government has done, but for an airline to be owned by a government is not a good thing. That's my personal view. I've experienced it, and my own view is that it's incompatible with the challenges that airlines face in what is an incredibly competitive airline industry.
Michael.
I would actively encourage the state involvement in the ownership of airlines. We compete with Alitalia in Italy, where I think the Italian government have set out a model for the excellent development of both railway infrastructure, airline infrastructure, and then bringing the two together. I mean, I feel somewhat sorry for Ben Smith. I think the Dutch behaviour has been an outrage. I think Mr Macron should immediately increase his stake to 25%. Prime Minister Rutte should then go to 25%, and let's have a race to see who gets to 51% first. And we'll all sit back and enjoy the show. We need entertainment in this life and in our lives, and state-owned airlines provide extraordinary entertainment. Long may they continue to thrive and survive, particularly if I'm competing with them. I would encourage it much more actively.
Even I'm feeling your discomfort now, Pieter.
Well, that was any for the criteria to be on stage here, right? No, I think there's been a very specific situation and a very specific time frame and a very specific point in time, and I think we have been able to make some developments in the last few years. Again, it's a very specific time and a very specific moment in time.
But on this, we'll move away from your situation, but on this question of Alitalia and what happens next, I mean, you spent the morning discussing competition and the issues involving it. Carsten, what is the competitive environment at the moment?
In Italy or in Europe?
Both. I mean, Alitalia, let me ask you, at what point does somebody say it should go?
I think we've been saying that for years.
If there wasn't the government, probably it would have happened that way. But on the other hand, Alitalia, it's a shame because it's a brand that should be around. Italy is part of Europe. It's, by the way, our most important market after the US. So it's not a small issue we're talking here. But
in the sense that it is emblematic or a symptom of something, or it sends a message. Or would you say that what happens in Italy can be written off as one on its own, or can we say this is a litmus test?
No, but I think we should. I always agree with Michael on this one. I don't fully agree because I think maybe different for easyJet and Ryanair, but for the three of us, being a global player in aviation is always political. Even though we are proud to be the only real private airline group, because as we all know, there is no WTO. There is bilateral agreements between governments, so we are in close contact with our governments when it comes to bilaterals. We are in close contact with the government of Switzerland and Austria, and so there's no, of course, investment, but to assume that this is a fully privatized industry, and therefore a private industry, non-political, is just naive. Our biggest owned Chinese carriers, or fully government-owned Gulf carriers, or fully government-protected US carriers. So this is not a global industry. I think it's different in Europe, and it should be. So I don't disagree with Michael's view if you restrict it to Europe. But if you look at global things, it's just not the way things work.
Yeah.
What was the question?
Alitalia.
Listen, I would agree with what has been said there, because I think it's pretty consistent. I mean, what's important for us is to make sure it's a level playing field.
But it's not.
No, but let me. I wasn't finished yet. I mean, one is to say that the level playing field, and if it's not, it's up to us to raise that voice. It's up to us to highlight the things that distorts the market from a competitive point of view. I would also though say, and I completely agree with the fact that I don't think government, in general, is a good owner of airline. But we see multiple failures in this industry by also people who hasn't been governments who's owned these airlines. So I think it always comes back to the objectives that an owner has about why they're doing it. The example Willie was mentioned to say that, look, if an owner comes up there and has something that they want the company to do that is not there to take the whole of the company forward, it doesn't benefit 100% of the shareholder, then it's wrong.
Are you expecting more airline failures in 2019, European airline failures in 2019?
Yes.
Willie?
Yes.
Lundgren?
Yes.
Michael?
Yes.
So I think we can agree that there will be more. Who?
Norwegian will be first, when they run out of 350 million around September, October. I mean, they won't necessarily go bust, but there's going to have to be some major traumatic financial restructuring there.
Which brings me to the point is, how much more restructuring within the European system needs there be? Carsten?
Well, I always say it's not going to be the same as the level in the US, in my personal view, because Europe is a more fragmented market. We'll be seeing more players than there is in the US, but it'll be somewhere between where the US now and where we are now. I don't know if it's a middle or 40% in between, but somewhere in between that.
And
but I do think, I mean, if you look, and I think everyone here, knows, the competitive landscape that we're competing in. I do think it's fair to say that, look, there's a number of inefficient models that is out there. And at the moment, you're going to see, if fuel prices goes up, if currency goes against you as well, those with inefficiencies in their models who doesn't have those positions will be more vulnerable.
And when they do, you pick them up? Or is this,
Not necessarily.
Sorry?
No, I think there needs to be consolidation, which is not only moving capacity from one owner to the other. There needs to be real consolidation, like the last month we have seen some, where capacities disappear.
Has the industry added capacity in more recent years, Pieter, to not to the bad old days, but new aircraft? All right, some of them are smaller, but more routes, new route structures. Is there too much capacity now in the system?
Well, the fact that under present circumstances, with the fuel price where it is, which is not too bad, with the economic momentum, which is pretty good, I would say, still airlines disappearing, sort of should be a very clear signal that the balance between supply and demand is not there, and airlines will not survive. And to Carsten's point earlier, we saw that in the introduction this morning that the A4E, with 15 member airline groups, is having 70% of all the customers in Europe. I think the top 5 in the US by itself is already presenting 70%. So that's just to show that the consolidation will go on, and more has to happen in Europe as well.
Willie, this idea, though, of what happens to the industry as consolidation takes place, as higher fuel prices. I mean, as I understand it, for all of you, we're in the rough we're in a roughly good sweet spot, not sweet spot, an acceptable place with oil prices at the moment.
Yeah, the oil price isn't the biggest challenge. It is for a number of airlines who don't have the capacity to deal with the volatility that we've seen in the oil price. So you've seen some airlines have gone in and put what I would describe as emergency hedging in place because they were worried about it going up, and in fact the price came down a bit. So they're locked into a higher price. We don't hedge for that purpose. We hedge to manage volatility, to give us some time to adjust, which is, I think, what most of us here do. Because I don't know what the oil price is going to be next year, and I'm not going to bet the company's money on what the oil price will be, but we will put hedging and have put hedging in place to enable us to withstand any significant volatility that may exist, and that's why we do it. So, I think there are airlines out there that are in a very weak position, will struggle to sustain the capacity that they have.
But are those airlines at the moment in a weak position? I mean, those of us who go back to the US days, where, of course, struggling airlines were able to seek protection and therefore just become cash generation vehicles. Are we in the situation where those weaker airlines are damaging your yields?
No, I don't think we are, because the US is different, where people can fall back into Chapter 11 and restructure and continue to operate. That isn't a possibility and shouldn't be a possibility in Europe. And I know people talk about a managed exit of capacity from the industry.
Is there too much capacity
No.
in the European system at the moment?
I would say there isn't, because if you look at the demand environment continues to be good, and if you look at the statistics, it would suggest that the demand has exceeded the capacity. If you look at RPKs against ASKs. Now, we always know we can fill our aircraft, by lowering prices, but we represent airlines that are all very profitable at the moment. So we are doing something right. But in a tough environment, in an environment where airlines were failing and going out of business.
Capacity at the moment. Capacity in the system in Europe at the moment.
No, I don't think we are at there's too much capacity. There's going to be more capacity. Most of us have aircraft orders out there for the next number of years, both on the long haul and the short haul side. But that continuing growth, I think for the well-managed airlines, which would be most of the people on this stage, most of that capacity is going to lower operating costs going forward. That's the reason why we grow. We're one-trick ponies, higher volumes, lower costs, lower fares, more money. But it means that there are other people out there who are incompetent or running not well, as Johan would describe them, weaker models are going to get flushed out in that process. It will be lumpy and bumpy because of government interventions and different rescues, but it is inevitable. The industry is moving inexorably towards, the 5 major airline groups. I think in the next 5 years will control 80% of the traffic across Europe. That won't be all unitary groups. There'll be alliances, there'll be some M&A, there'll be some failures. But it's moving inexorably in that way, and I think that will be good for Europe. A4E will be stronger. The fares will be lower. Certainly on the short haul side, the fares will be lower. I suspect the fares on the long haul will also come under pressure because you'll have more capacity coming out of the Gulf and the Chinese carriers as well. So we should generally be optimistic. But the secret is we're all making money. We're all making money by growing, and we all, I think, generally have a plan to continue to grow. Carsten has recently bought up Air Berlin precisely so that he can grow his dominance in the German market, but nevertheless he will continue to grow. We'll continue to grow. So I think the capacity. The question is not, is there too much capacity? Is there too much capacity at the pricing that has been currently charged to enable the well-run airlines to make a profitable return? And the answer to that is clearly not.
Carsten.
All day we discuss European aviation as if it was constrained to Europe. But there's also a global element. We all compete with global players outside of Europe, at least the 3 of us. And I think it takes a lot of fighting power with potential overcapacity and yields being too low in Europe. We should actually rather invest abroad. So when I look at the global market share of European airlines on traffic flows to and from Europe, I'm not talking domestic India or China, we have been losing the last years. And I think that shows that the relative infrastructure constraints, certain element of overcapacities. I don't think there needs to be a ticket for €9, to be honest. I don't think there is €9 tickets in the US. I don't think there's €9 tickets in domestic China. Only we do this. Battlefield.
Yeah, I can only underpin that. I think it was Carsten earlier remark when we spoke about global competition. If we are competing not only with airlines but with airline systems on the global level, and we sort of artificially disconnect here what we do on the long haul sector and what we do on the European sector, it's just a one side of the coin. And again, for us competing in the US, in the Middle East, in China, and yet have to keep a European system in place, competing with our other friends, I think it's a balancing act we need to find there.
Exactly.
But I just think, I mean, one part of the equation is the capacity, but the other part is the demand. Look, if you say, well, is there too much capacity in the system? It depends on actually what is the demand that you are creating by the product and service that you offer. And I think that actually, in a good, healthy market, which I think the aviation, industry is, this is partly self-regulating. If you don't have a proposition for your customers that they're going to go and choose you before a competitor, that you believe that you're providing a value for money, they will go somewhere else. And those models who doesn't, function in that environment will not be around.
Right, but for the last 15 years, as far as I can remember, we have had the somewhat sterile argument or discussion at these events between low cost or legacy, low cost or legacy. But isn't Carsten right, Mike? The rubber is hitting the road. The airlines in the middle here have to compete on global scales, but on their European sides, they're being driven harshly by yourselves. One side doesn't meet the other. It's the €9 ticket, which is what
Is
you're
Carsten right? No, Carsten's wrong. But
You never say that.
not for the first time, mind you, but the ultimate answer is, are we, as the 5 biggest airlines in Europe, making more money than we ever made before? We are.
We are.
Have we collectively restructured the cost base or the way? I mean, if you brought back somebody who, I don't know, passed away in 1985 when they were all legacy airlines losing money, strike-ridden, union-run, political interference, the industry has been transformed.
Right.
We have much better management running the airlines in Europe now than they had in those days. There's very little political interference, and the airlines' results speak for themselves. And ultimately, I think that's really the answer. So, should everybody be flying around for €9? No, not everybody. Should some people fly around for €9? Yes, because that's what you do to get them to Frankfurt on a Tuesday in November. If that's what it takes, that's what it takes. And we will all compete on those pricing. And remember, it's one of the compelling arguments we have, particularly with the politicians when we're looking for changes. Right. We're delivering lower cost air travel than we ever have before. The traffic flows are growing. We're creating millions of jobs all over Europe. This works. We need, please remove these impediments.
So, I listened very closely today to the various presentations. The A4E goal, the A4E ambition, and the ability to deliver upon it. You have failed on the question of air traffic control issues. I don't want to get into this year. You are the customers of the air traffic control systems. You are the ones who pay their bills. Carsten?
I don't think we've failed. I don't think we've succeeded yet, is the way I would put it.
All right. So let's go back
I think to add to Willie's point, I think there were 3 points. First of all, get the numbers out there, and I think what we have seen and what we have heard is some of the numbers out there in terms of what's the number of delays, what's the effect, what's the economic impact, how much additional CO2 emissions is there. So I think it's to the credit of Eamonn, who was on stage earlier. I think a lot of that information is now clearly visible for everyone. So that's one. 2, we have put it high on the agenda for some of the decision makers, which wasn't the case. Did that lead to decisions immediately? No, it hasn't yet. Can you blame us for that? Probably not. But I think it's our mission and part of doing it, getting it. So I think a failure is not the right word.
Okay.
Are we finished yet? No, we are clearly not.
I'm going to go deeper into this realm of...
And certainly because we've addressed, and Michael pushed for that, a whole list of very tangible and concrete actions we want to push forward.
Right, and how many new taxes have you seen off successfully?
Actually, quite a few. You know, because you only hear about the ones that were introduced. You don't hear about the ones that haven't been introduced. And I think the
You haven't
industry...
succeeded with APD in the UK.
No, but I haven't given up.
The Irish have scrapped their travel tax. The Dutch were going to introduce one and reversed it. The Swedes are going to raise it and reverse it. We are having significant successes there.
Yeah, and I think the UK will address APD because, you know, in a post-Brexit UK, it's going to have to be more competitive, and you're not going to be competitive if you are the highest tax regime around, and that's the reality. So these are long-term battles, though, Richard. You know, that we don't fight them over 1 year and then give up. You know, we have been fighting against APD, and we will continue. And for as long as I'm in this industry, I will fight against it. Right. And whoever takes over will fight against it. And that's what we've got to do, because this is why we created A4E, because in the past we did give up. So people said, all we have to do is resist these guys for a few years and they'll go away. And we created A4E, where we said we're going to target key specific issues, and these will be the same issues year in, year out, and we're not going to go away. And that's why next year at this event we will be talking about the same things, and we'll talk about it until we succeed, and we will succeed.
Right, but sorry.
No, I just to say that I think it's a fair challenge to say that, look, you know, we find 2018 completely unacceptable. You know, some of the things we're hearing about the changes that we want to get into, these things needs to happen. I think one way, if we're going to be, you know, trying to work out how efficient we can be, is to be very specific with those who fails. I think you mentioned earlier in one of the debates here, is look, on the ATC, it's not everybody who fails there. There are specific people, regions who fails there, and I think we should be clearer of coming out with who those are.
So on this idea, Carsten, I have some experience with the counterpart A4A in the United States and the lobbying mechanisms of there within Congress. Are you prepared to consider that something like A4E will or may need more resources and will need to take a harder line? Because this is the first time A4E's had a chance to work with a new commission. This is you start on a front foot this time.
Because I don't want to repeat things which have been said today so often, let me go back to this global competition. I think we are doing much, much better, as Willie said in his speech, than we have been before. But I think we are missing the power, for example, of the Airlines for America, because they're much closer to their unions, which is a huge element I think we're still missing. Also today, no union representatives here. I think that's a weakness we have to correct, because they are our supporters when it comes not to the competition within each other. That's a big weakness. We are we're presuming that this is about competition between each other. I think Michael and I, of course, we always make jokes about competing. I think less than 1% of my passengers are flying on routes where they also could fly Ryanair. He is not really my competitor. My biggest competitor is Air France KLM. My second biggest is Turkish. And that's where I think we need to bring A4E to the global game is the one we are looking at.
How do you do that?
And the Americans do this very smartly. The unions go to Capitol Hill together with the CEOs. They arrange themselves. Only the German car industry, I think, does it as well. And then they create a voice in the government. I think we are far away from that. But as Willie said again, we are much better, I think, by what the five of us have founded than we were years before.
No question that the environment that you are now playing in is very different from 6 years ago. My issue to you now is, how do you take it to the next level? Because A4E is established, it has a certain credence. What do you as chiefs now demand and will do to help at the next level? Michael, because you're the next chairman.
I think we are, coming from today's meeting, we have a much more concrete plan of action on each of these issues. And again, we have slightly over-focused on ATC today, but airport regulation, the environment, our contribution, environmental measures. With concrete actions, we say, right, when are we going to see actions on this? I think we're taking ATC because it's going to become a big issue for us all collectively in April, May and June, when the French will start their annual recreational strikes. So it's the more kind of immediate one. But there are now concrete solutions, and I think we as an industry and as a body, A4E, would be saying, what does the new Transport Commissioner, what have you done to deliver on these?
I believe I wasn't in the presentations he made to you today, but Eamonn Brennan talked very much about the long-term view. And I can understand why you're concerned about what's going to happen in June, July and August, because you'll literally be, you're all about to get beaten up in the press of your individual countries. But do you agree that in the way of the Chinese and the way of the Japanese, in a sense, you need to be thinking 30 years, 40 years, 50 years hence for the infrastructure of aviation? And frankly, as you've seen at Heathrow, as you've seen at Frankfurt, as you've all seen at your various different legacy hub airports, that's not happening.
No, I think you're right, but I do think that there is a discussion about that. It's just that the frustrating part here is that we have clear solutions to fix a problem. We can eradicate the whole problems of the disruption, and then you will have much more capacity available for yourself.
But even so, are you still thinking long term?
Yeah, no, I think we are. Like, to be fair, Eamonn gave us a presentation where, long term, 2030. He showed us what the traffic flows in Europe based on projected 1.9% growth per annum in the number of flights, and what Europe would look like in 2030. And Europe will not be able to operate. The ATC system will not be able to, unless there is change. But what we need to do, exactly as Johan says, the short-term measures that can be taken and should be taken, because we shouldn't sit back and say, let's focus on 2030, when there's solutions available today and can be put in place and can make a difference and will then give everybody the opportunity to think a bit more long term.
I agree with you, but what's happening, I'm suggesting to you, is that you are focusing on that, and the system, i.e. the way it all works, can only focus on one thing at a time. So the attention is going on this summer, but not enough attention is going on the long-term planning aspects by yourselves.
I disagree. I mean, if you look at each of us, we're all laying down aircraft orders that will take us through to the next decade. In fact, if you use the useful life of those aircraft, it's the next 20 or 30 years. We are focused on the long term. But the purpose of A4E is to what change can we introduce in the very short term to fix what are today's immediate problems. We're coming up with those solutions while individually we're all managing our growth profile. I mean, who's going to deliver that growth to 2030 in Europe? The 5 people sitting on this panel. Like, we already have the focus. The long term is already planned. The question is how we're going to eliminate these short-term roadblocks, ATC, airport regulation, the environmental impact of what we do.
No, but my point that I'm listening is, Carsten, that I understand they are the short-term problem that has to be solved by A4E, but A4E needs to also be agitating for the future airports, the future runways, the future air traffic control systems of 2040 and 2050. That is what China is doing. China is putting in place an infrastructure for the middle part of the 21st century. You are merely asking for the 20th century to be put in place. Or to be updated.
We're actually doing both. So we've got a meeting scheduled with Eurocontrol and the CEOs in the middle of September to not just talk about the short, because we've done today was largely about the short term, but we are looking at the long term as well. And Michael's right. We're investing billions in new aircraft, and we expect to operate those aircraft in an efficient manner on a global scale. It's not just about Europe. And some of the traffic flows we saw were not just traffic flows into Europe, they're traffic flows over Europe. And that's showing significant increase as well.
But this is part of the same question. If
I'm going to call up some questions. While Johan's answering, can we bring some questions up for me to have a look? You carry on, sir.
No, I was just saying that this is part of the same question. That 2030 chart that we looked at, in order to get to that 2030 and beyond situation, we need to take the short
to the person who actually puts their hand up and admits they are the anonymous no, too late. Imagine you could take over the airline of one of your co-panelists for 1 week. Which one and why? Carsten, which airline would you take over and why for a week?
I would take Willie's job because I'm jealous for his home market in London.
Ooh. Which one would
Must
you
be
take?
so easy, Willie. Must be so easy.
I would take KLM and I would spend that week convincing them that they should be part of IAG.
KLM, which one would you take?
I will take Ryanair and I would show customers that they can really have an enjoyable journey if they pay a few buckets more.
Michael, which one of them were you going to take?
I've changed my mind in the last 5 seconds. It was originally going to be Carsten, so I could feel what it feels like to own Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and all of that. I've changed it the last minute to Pieter so that I could encourage the Dutch government, buy more of Air France. We need control.
Johan, which?
I take all of them.
What would you?
I noticed that nobody wanted to take this one. Anyway,
Yeah, now,
you couldn't
now,
do it anyway. You
now.
couldn't run it. True. You couldn't do it.
Now, is that an insult because of the airline, or a compliment because you're running it so well?
It's a massive compliment. It cannot be looked in any other way.
That's one way of looking at it.
Right, let's look at. Are you in favour of a fully liberalised? Actually, do you know what I really like about this? You're all really brave. You've all submitted your questions anonymously. Are you in favour? So let's talk about Brexit. Let's ignore the question because it's very complicated and even I don't understand it. You're all ready for Brexit. Each one of you, I've asked you during the course of the day, are you ready for Brexit? And you all say yes. But what for you is a post-Brexit world? How does it look in terms of what a future relationship looks like? Michael?
It'll be exactly like the pre-Brexit world looks like. It will be Brexit in name only. They'll fudge their way to some Norwegian outcome or relationship where either they will, in effect, be out of the European Union but be part of the European Union the same way that Norway is, where they pay, they obey, and there's free movement of people, or they'll give up the stupidity of Brexit altogether and go back and say, what are we leaving for, and they'll remain in. I think there will be ultimately no difference post-Brexit to pre-Brexit, except you'll have better political leadership in the UK, because frankly it couldn't get much worse than it is at the moment.
I think from an aviation point of view it'll be the same. You know, I think ultimately that's
But
where...
you've had to spend a great deal of time and effort trying to get yourself Brexit compliant.
But you know, we have to do these things, yes. And wouldn't it be great if we could have spent that time and effort focusing on the future of air traffic control or the future of the environmental performance? It would have been great. But the reality is we've spent that time and effort making sure that we're going to be...
But Mike, a year ago, in this room I think it was, you were getting very excited.
In Brussels?
Sorry?
Never get excited in Brussels.
You were getting very excited and saying, reminding everybody that the schedules for next summer come out and we don't have any idea and this, that and the other. Well, you know, at the end of the day, you don't have that much more of an idea, but you still have to produce your schedules, and maybe it's a lot to do about nothing.
I mean, ultimately, it probably will be a lot to do about nothing, except you look at the number of jobs and the number of investment in the UK that has been postponed, that has moved outside of the UK. We will look back on Brexit, I think, in retrospect, as a tragedy and really big economic. They've done a lot of damage to themselves economically in the UK, and ultimately, whether they reverse the decision, as the Irish have twice in the past, or they have a free trade agreement that will look exactly like membership of the EU anyway, and they'll still be obeying EU regulation. Everybody's going to wonder, what the hell was all that about, and why did we waste so much time and lose so much economic growth and opportunity over a 2 or 3 year period?
Johan, when it's all done and dusted, you've spent a lot of money getting yourself ready for Brexit. You ready?
Yes.
Right, we'll move on. towards the end, the question of EU 261 form or another, but what's it going to take to get the directive changed and your obligation ends, in your view, Carsten?
No, I think if we would put the penalty to where the cause of the problem is, then it would, first of all, serve a good purpose, and I think then suddenly it would not just be the airlines lobbying against it, but all the others, airports, air traffic control as well. So I think it would not just only be fair, it would also be the right answer to this unfairness in the model.
Right, but in terms, I mean, I don't have any numbers one way or the other, but Willie, why don't you sue the air traffic?
We can't. We've looked at it, yeah, and we've looked at every legal angle at it, and I know some of the others on the panel here have separately looked at it, and it's just not possible. I would love to think, and I guarantee you, if it were possible, we would do it. But because it's unacceptable where we are. I gave a figure this morning, which again is from Eurocontrol data, and I appreciate the fact that they are being much more open. But their data showed for Vueling, which had a terrible summer because of air traffic control, only 20.6% of the delays that Vueling encountered were caused by the airline. So, you know, this isn't a problem. This is not airlines being inefficient or airlines going out of their way to disrupt our customers. We're actually working hard to make sure, you know, we do a good job. The problem is, you know, in the past it was perceived that all of the problems were of our making. And we've got to change that perception. We've got to change the reality of where it is.
Go ahead.
Okay, just say, I mean, in the discussion we had this morning as well, you know, we are paying for a product and service not being delivered. And I did say to Eamonn this morning that, you know, we might stop paying you. And then he said, well, then I'll seize your aircraft. And that kind of dampened my enthusiasm.
Well, hang on. You say that.
Pay that
hang on.
But the point
you
is,
say that. That would get everybody's attention, because at the moment what you're doing is going through the regulatory bureaucratic process at the speed of the process, Michael. At the speed of the process. You are the victims of the process. Have a couple of aircraft seized, suddenly it gets on the front pages of the papers, suddenly national politicians are involved in it, suddenly there's a crisis, and suddenly something gets done, Michael.
And I think the chairperson should go with first example to lead the way.
Because you have the worst numbers.
But he has so few aircraft, we can't do that to Ryanair.
Getting aircraft seized is not the solution, because your aircraft are seized, your passengers are stranded there. The first thing you do is you immediately make the payment. It achieves nothing. I mean, the French government would like nothing, would like nothing than to go and grab a couple of Ryanair aircraft. Even when they owe us money, they go and try and seize our aircraft. The solution is still, you know, as Carsten has identified, we need to pass on. I mean, the EU26 legislation is quite clear. The airlines are allowed to recover their costs from the people who caused the delays, except the ATC providers have immunity. So we can't, there is no way we could do it. You've got to stretch that. I mean, I would want two reforms of EU 261. Allow us to pass on our ability to claim from the airports and the ATC providers who genuinely cause it. Where we cause the delay, we should pay. And there should be some relativity between the compensation payable and the airfare paid. Because if I have a customer who chose to fly with me for 30 euros, he shouldn't get 300 euros back.
Final issue, which I think is probably one of the most important in the industry this year. Which of you, Willie or Pieter, which of you is really 100 years old? Is it KLM, which is claiming it started in
1919, 7th of October, yes.
Or is it whatever it was called when you started?
Aircraft Transport and Travel, August 1919. DH4 from Heathrow, was Hounslow Heath as it was then, to Paris. One passenger, leather.
Nothing's changed really.
100% seat factor.
Yeah, not very environmental friendly though.
No, but you know, like KLM, to be fair, you know, has I think the record for being the airline longest in existence with the same name.
Uninterrupted, same name for 100 years.
Yeah.
I think this is where a little of our internal competition comes from.
Yeah.
I think you changed it a couple of times, and that's
You've
where
changed
we
a few times, haven't you?
Once or twice, yeah. Yeah, just polish the name of this, yeah. And,
What does it say, though, about an industry, the resilience, the ingenuity of an industry where you have the companies like yourselves that are, but continually changing and having to adapt, really?
But I think you have to, and I think progress needs change. You can't make progress without change, and if you don't change, you're never going to progress. So, I think change is a real positive. I really do, and I think the industry has got better at changing and adapting, and it's the reason you have 5 airline CEOs here who are running successful businesses, because we've changed. Had we stayed the same, we'd be out of business.
Change. You've taken over. You are the new one on this panel, to that extent. What change do you see?
Compared to the 100-year-olds I'm sitting between, yeah, you're right, I'm new to that. I think it's ingrained in the speed of the industry these days. I think it's ingrained with the technology, the opportunities that gives you the opportunity just to move forward your positions and to become an even stronger alternative for your customers.
Carsten?
I think Willie gave the answer, at least for those of us who have been around a while.
How long have you been?
Well, we were around twice. We were grounded for 10 years, between 45 and 55, and restarted in 55.
Oh, we'll allow him to ignore that.
So, but it was our fault, so I give the prize to England and the Netherlands. They deserve it. But again, I think I come back to my point. I'm not worried about the competition within each other.
Yeah.
Even some of the things we discussed today, they're all kind of hurting us the same. So within our competing environment, it's a zero-sum game one way or another. I'm worried about the energy and money we lose to compete globally. And when you look at whatever the last 50 years, where was British Airways globally 50 years ago, Lufthansa 50 years ago, KLM 50 years ago, and where are we now? We surely did not do our homework.
But now's the time to do it.
Well, we are coming back, I think, some of us, but the energy we lose in Europe is part of the problem, a thing which could be used better globally.
100 years of KLM.
Well, as Willie said, it's innovation eventually and constant improvement, which brings you to 100 years. No airline can just sit there because of the long history and the long. But I think it also demonstrates that many of the airlines, and especially those who are also flying long haul, are doing for the local economies. And coming back to your opening here today, if I see how impactful the local economy is and how KLM as an airline is connecting the Netherlands to the world and the world to the Netherlands and what it does for the economic developments, it is no secret and it's therefore no surprise that it has a lot of sort of effects in government interactions.
I'm going to regret this. You get the last word, Michael. I haven't asked the question yet.
I think what this panel proves is that any of you have children who are very difficult, strangely idiotic or crazy, is that there's a bright future for them in the airline industry. Because the only way to succeed in this industry is to be a little bit crazy, a little bit lunatic, and probably a little bit wild. And you will have a very bright future sitting on this panel in 10 years' time as chief executives of the 110-year-old KLM and the 110-year-old IAG.
How long has Ryanair been going?
Ryanair's been going, I think, since about 90. There's a bit of a, nobody's quite sure when the hell the first flight was in Ryanair. So about 1985. So I think we've been around for. We're the Johnny. We ourselves in easyJet, the Johnny come ladies. About 35 years, I think. But I wasn't around in those days.
You're a child.
I like to think so, but
and more than one person has disagreed. Won't agree. Ladies and gentlemen, our panel.
Well done. Pieter. Thank you. Well done.
Thank you.
Carsten. Good. Well done.
Thank you very much.
Well done.
Excellent. Thank you.
That was good.
First of all, before Mike, fucking Mike. Yeah. Okay. No. Okay, we're back. First of all, I would like to thank this great panel. Richard Quest again, thank you very much for doing an excellent job. I would also like to ask for a round of applause for all of our speakers and moderators today. Our sponsors, and also thank you for the team, the A4E team, and Fly Global for helping us out today. I would like to thank all of you today for joining us and for joining us in calling the next European Parliament and the Commission to support our call for the future. Thank you very much. I would like to, with that, wish you all I would say, smooth journey home, hopefully without too many disruptions on the way, and let's make 2019 a successful next year for the next 5 years. Thank you very much.